This is Dr. Weissel, and this is the third installment of a discussion of an essay by Ignacio Ellacuria, What is the Point of Philosophy?, published in 1976 in a journal called Abra, made later into a pamphlet for philosophy students at his university in El Salvador, the University of Central America, Simeon Cañas. We're just at the conclusion here to pull together the different ideas that have been presented in this essay so far. So his conclusion is, first, that philosophy is individual. It's individual in a couple senses. I mean, without it, we cannot be who we really are. You think, wait a minute, there's plenty of people I know who aren't philosophers. He's not talking about philosophy professors. He's not talking about philosophy majors or minors, although those are very good things, as we saw at the end of the last lecture. It can be really helpful. But what he means is human beings are by their very nature philosophical. They feel the call, the urge, at least sometimes and in some ways, to question, to seek wisdom, to desire it, to feel called or called out by philosophy. Each one of us, it's not something that somebody can do for you. It's something that you have to do on your own. It's a way to be who you really are. So we can't be who we are without philosophy, and philosophy has to, even though it's part of a large conversation that's been going on for thousands of years about who we are, each one of us has to take up our part in that conversation to be who we are. Philosophy is individual in that sense. Philosophy is also social, though. As we've tried to insist, as Ellacuria has insisted, society needs philosophy. Why? Because society is in need of lenses. Philosophy, when at its best, is trying to come up with a robust, comprehensive, systematic lenses, ideologies, in the sense of being able to see what's really real. We can't live without it. Society needs it. However, we know the risk of ideologizing. We know that it's possible to fall into the temptation of thinking that the system that you came up with is sufficient for all time, that the relative perspective that you have on the nature of truth and beauty and goodness is the answer to the question of truth, beauty, and goodness. Becomes an ideology in the negative sense, a substitute for a view of the way things really are. So you have to deploy its negative or critical dimension of philosophy's critical or negative dimension towards popular beliefs. You know, remember doubt and negation? Like, oh, everybody thinks that. Is that right? We have to deploy its critical dimension towards the literature that's presented and the kind of books we read and the kind of stories we tell and the movies we make. We have to bring its critical disideologizing dimension to our law codes and even to the Constitution itself to try to figure out not just what people say it means, but what it means for us, what we make it to mean for us, and being responsible for that. We need to bring it to our political programs. We have to ask ourselves questions about our own political community and our own collective consciousness in communications, especially in social media. We need to be more critical. We need to disideologize and not just say things are what everybody seems to think they are today. So how do we do that? Right? Remember, the intended audience of this essay is for people who feel the urge, and hopefully now you feel a little bit of the call to do this. He says, I'm going to tell you how we do it. We need to be immersed in reality and need to know how it is beyond appearances. We need to know the actuality and the possibilities. We can't live in fantasy land. And he's blunt about this. Like, whoever does not satisfy those two conditions is not suited for philosophizing. Now, again, even though I think he would agree with me, Ellacuria would agree with me that humans are philosophers by nature. Again, not professors or anything like that, but we seek to know. We're filled with wonder. To do the job of philosophy, you have to keep it real, as we say. You have to understand that the way things appear are not necessarily how it is, and you have to be open to the possibilities. And if you're in denial, or you're too timid for uncertainty and for possibilities, then you're not going to go very far with this. You're just not. But you must also master the technical requirements of philosophy. It's not just winging it. Even though everybody is philosophical, it doesn't mean everybody's sort of good at it, if I could put it that way. Just, most of us, if we were not born with impediments or have had accidents or whatever, most of us can run. But not all of us are really good runners. Most of us can bounce a basketball, but not all of us are good dribblers. You have to, if you're going to get good at something, we have the capacity for lots of things, but to get good at it, you got to work at it. You got to learn the techniques. You got to be disciplined. You got to be steadfast. You got to be persistent. He admits it, because he knows who he's talking to. He's to students who are, required to take philosophy. They don't know why. Philosophy says nothing to some people, not because philosophy is empty, but because these people are not equipped to hear. They're not equipped to hear. One of the reasons, one of the rationales this university, requires you to take philosophy is because they're trying to equip you to hear. They're not trying to indoctrinate you. Philosophy is not indoctrination. Any philosopher who tried to indoctrinate you to some view so that you became a dogmatist about that view, it's not really worthy of the name. That's not what's going on here. That's certainly not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to just open you up to some possibilities, equip you to hear some things. If you hear them and reject them, that's on you. That's up to you, right? But some people think, I don't get any of this. I don't hear anything of this, because you're not ready. You've not readied yourself. You're not open yourself to this. And part of what we're trying to do here is to open you up, not just to philosophy, but open you up to your own life, to your own reality, to your own existence. And he says we also need to confront great thinkers. We don't need to bow down before great thinkers. If you've had me before, you've probably heard me say this a bunch of times. Just because Aristotle says something doesn't mean it's right. It's important to try to understand what he's saying, because we got to go with the benefit of the doubt here. He's been influential for thousands of years. Think what you could do that would be influential for thousands of years. Most of us are, blink of an eye, a flash in the pan. The great thinkers are great, not because they're right. They're great because they gave it a great effort. They gave it a great try. And they are people who have presented us with ideas that are rich with possibilities. We may read Aristotle and come to thoughts that he would never have had, but we would never have had them were it not for Aristotle. They're important because what they might get started in us, what they might spark in us, what they might initiate in us. Philosophizing is not the transmission and learning of a series of contents more or less understood, the stuff that you're going to see in the exams in this course. Sorry, but we have a practice here. We're going to talk about that practice, but at the moment, that's our practice. You're interested in your GPA? You're interested in the number. You're interested in quantifying things. You're interested in the kind of certainty. Well, you do that by learning a series of contents, and you more or less get them, and then you get a grade. Great. It's not what philosophizing is really all about, though. It's about the initiating of one's own capacity for philosophical thought. The question came up earlier about whether philosophy can be taught, and Plato, an interesting guy. He gave us all these dialogues like the Euthyphro and the Republic that we've talked about. But he also wrote some letters. He didn't write essays as like an Immanuel Kant would say, or Descartes. We would just write down his thoughts and sign his name at the bottom. Plato wrote dialogues in which he does not appear as a character for the most part. But he did write some letters. And his most famous letter, which is the size of a small book, not like we write tweets, the size of a small book was a letter. The seventh letter, if you want to look it up, the seventh letter. And in the course of this big letter, he says something, I'm paraphrasing here. He says, I heard there's this guy came to town and that he teaches philosophy. He says, I'm going to have to check that out because I'll tell you the truth, I don't think you can do that. And allegedly this guy's teaching my philosophy, Plato writes. And look, if anybody could teach my philosophy, I could teach my philosophy. It's mine. I'm Plato. And I don't think I could do it. I don't think you could teach philosophy, and these are my words, like you could teach somebody to change a flat tire on their car or put a deck on the back of their house. I could teach somebody to do those things if I knew how. But teaching philosophy I don't think you could do that. Plato said more or less the following. I think it's more like this. Inside the soul of the philosopher is a fire, a burning desire, a seeking of wisdom, a yearning for truth, goodness, and beauty. It's a fire. And in the soul of a student is kindling wood. I don't know if you know what that is. Little dry sticks that you use to get a fire started in your fireplace, and then you put the big logs on top afterwards. Dry kindling sticks. And maybe a spark from the soul of the fire and the philosopher leaps over and catches onto the kindling. And maybe that spark gets fanned in the soul of the student, the potential philosopher. And maybe it catches fire. And maybe logs are put on the fire. And maybe it turns into a fire in its own right. Or maybe not. It's a maybe. It's an uncertainty. It's not a guarantee. You can't ask for your money back if you don't become a philosopher at the end of this course. And you can't ask for your money back if you get an A+ in this course. Not that we give A+, but the school doesn't. Even if you got an A+ in philosophy class, it wouldn't mean that the fire caught in your soul, as Plato would put it. So Ellacuria is saying studying the great philosophers is a good way to maybe catch a spark in the soul. It's worked before. It's worked for thousands of years. It's worth a try, but there's no guarantees. Right? You can have transmitted to you through the text and through this class a series of contents and ideas and vocabulary and names and dates, and you can more or less understand them, and you can more or less get a good grade in the class. But that would not mean you're a philosopher. Philosophizing is about initiating one's own capacity for philosophical thought. The truth will set us free, Ellacuria would certainly agree, as a Jesuit priest. Philosophy as the search for the fullness of truth, not the mere absence of error, but the full presence of reality, is thus an indispensable element in the integral liberation of our peoples. When these peoples count on the real possibility of thinking for themselves in all the orders of thought, they will take the path of liberty and of full possession of themselves. That is what philosophy is for. That's how his essay ends, and that's how we'll end this discussion.